I just wanted to introduce you to Jane real quick. She founded the Vermont Folk Life Center in 1983, and she still serves as its executive director. During that time, with her involvement in the Folk Life Center, she traveled the back roads of Vermont, recording oral interviews of everyday Vermonters, and produced a variety of media productions, exhibitions, and publications. In retirement, she has completed a book, Daisy Turner's Kin, an African-American family saga, based on 60 interviews with the daughter of slaves. I just wanted to mention a few things that the library has. The book that she most recently wrote, Daisy Turner's Kin, is available in the library. I read it. It's absolutely fantastic. It's so interesting. And there are copies, if you're interested in purchasing a copy of the book, there are softcover copies on the back corner table there. We have in the library, we have Journey's End, which is the memories and traditions of Daisy Turner and her family. So I believe this is narrated by someone else, but you do hear Daisy Turner's voice. Vermont Folk Life Center is probably around for a while.
It's narrated by Barbara Jordan.
Oh yes, thank you, okay. And even in the children's section, we have, this is a Vermont Folk Life Center book, which is fantastic. It's about Daisy, when she was a little girl, and the doll that she had to write and recite a poem about, I believe. You'll probably you might hear about that today. If you would be so kind to fill out the survey at the end of the program, we can use that to help us get more programs like this in the future. And there are also other activities. I don't have a chance to fold all these, but there are other activities going on about African American history, some pertaining to Vermont, some to the whole United States. We just read Frederick Douglass' speech a couple months ago, which was very interesting. So feel free to take one of these brochures home. And let's get on with it, Jane. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you all for coming on a Saturday afternoon. Let me know if you can't hear me. Just tell me to turn up the volume. I thought I'd start by telling you that Daisy Turner's Kin is a family story that encompasses 4 generations and spans 2 centuries. It is told by the Turners for the Turners, which is pretty unusual. And what I tried to do was document it, because I knew that oral histories, family stories get a bad rap. And unless it is documented, it is often not taken seriously. Now, the reason that the story has existed is, of course, thanks to Daisy being a wonderful storyteller. But she came from an African tradition, West African tradition of griots, who were storytellers, poets, men of knowledge, genealogists for the community. And Daisy's grandfather was a Yoruba and learned in this tradition, passed it on to his son, who in turn passed it on to Daisy. So she comes by it naturally, and she was a wonderful storyteller. Now, I first met Daisy in 1983, and I was sent a clipping from Margaret MacArthur. Do you remember? She was a singer, a musician. And she said, Daisy's 100. You better go see her. I always meant to go collect her songs, but I never got there. Go. And so immediately I began looking for an introduction to Daisy Turner. And I'd been working for the Arts Council doing an exhibit of folk art all through oral histories. And so I always looked for an introduction. Well, you can get an introduction to the governor of Vermont quite easily, but not to Daisy Turner. I discovered that she had a gun and wasn't afraid to use it. So I decided, well, I better write her a letter. So I sweated over this letter, sent it off, waited a week on tenterhooks, and then called her. No answer. So I waited another day and called her again. And this time I get a ringing hello, and I'm thinking, is this a 100-year-old woman? Miss Turner? Yes. And so I started in on my spiel about how I wanted to come see her. And she listened for about 5 seconds, got fed up, and then suddenly bellowed over the phone, "Are you a prejudiced woman?" Totally taking me aback. And I said, "I don't think so." She said, "Come anytime." I said, "How about next Wednesday?" And we were off and running. And I went down to see her in Grafton, and she was a wonderful storyteller. But I didn't know exactly what I was hearing. We were in New Orleans, we were in Virginia, we were in Africa, and I knew that oral history memory was totally considered unreliable, but always meaningful. And what I needed to do was discover how it was meaningful. Often it gives you sort of signposts to history. And as you know, memory is emotional. You often feel the way you felt when memory was laid down. It's personal. So I began to wonder, what am I hearing? And so I was hearing about this man called John Golden, who was her father's master. And he supposedly lived along the Rappahannock near Port Royal, Virginia. So I went down to Fredericksburg, and I began to find that there was such a man called John Golden. And indeed, I found his great-grandson and was able to go look for the plantation that Daisy's father grew up on. And the great-grandson gave me, I would say, not great directions, so I spent a lot of time lost. And finally, I spotted this blue sort of house, and, not the grand white mansion that Daisy talked about. And so I wasn't at all sure that this was the place, and there was no one to ask. And she talked about the 4 porches, and the porches were very definitely had seen better days. But it took me 20 years later before I could really establish that indeed this was the John Golden plantation. Now, Daisy, just to give you a sampling of how vibrant her storytelling is, let me just play you a little section of it.
And then on the top of it all, in the very midst of the terrible situation, Lincoln was shot dead. Well, then Father said, as he, with his group, was getting ready to be mustered out, they heard, my father told it again and again, he heard the hoof, the boots, horse, and he rode running away from after shooting Lincoln. They was on the edge of Washington, ready to be mustered out. And so Father said, what a time.
And this was Alec Turner, her father, who was really she would sit at his feet, and he was a marvelous storyteller, raconteur, and he was also a pretty good chronicler, as I was able to find out. He had what I would call touchstone stories, and these were critical moments in his life. When he first discovered he was a slave, when learning to read, escaping from the plantation. These were really life-changing events, and this became sort of the backbone of the Turner narrative. And I'll sprinkle, as we go throughout this, some of those stories. He was the one that kept the family chronicle alive. And he talked about his grandmother, who was an English woman, the daughter of a trader, an English woman who went out to Africa on her honeymoon, and her husband was called Supercargo. He was the trader for the ship. And so this would be about 1802 to 1810. And Daisy talked about them going to Cape Coast. And I knew her family was Yoruba, and that's Nigeria area. And Cape Coast just made no sense to me at all, being thinking about South Africa. Doing my research, I discovered that there was a place called Cape Coast Castle, which was the major English fort and port as well. And behind it, the town was called Cape Town. And so suddenly this made sense. And so the ship put in to Cape Coast Castle and then continued on down the coast. And here you can see, here's Cape Coast. And down somewhere around Badagry, she was overcome by a violent storm. And in West Africa, before the rainy season, they have what they call tornadoes that are these violent squalls. And the ship was overcome and sank. Her husband was drowned, and the Englishwoman was saved by an African chief's son who was known as a very powerful swimmer. Now, you don't swim on the coast of Benin. The surf is tremendous. There are all kinds of tidal currents, and if that's not enough, there are sharks. So the fact that he saved this woman was notable, and the fact that he was a strong swimmer is part of the Turner narrative. Now, the Englishwoman never got back to England, and indeed she was kept by her savior's tribe, he was a Yoruba, and she had a child by him. And he grew up with an English-speaking mother. He learned English, and he became a trader, and then he became involved in the slave trade and was captured as a slave himself and brought to this country in a Spanish ship that was known as the Phoenix. And I was able to find all kinds of information on the Phoenix because she was captured by an American ship and towed, once they discovered the slaves on board, was towed into New Orleans. And the documents and letters talk about how when she was first setting out, she had to go north of Fernando Po because the British had a blockade here, and they went into Calabar, which was where they took on the bulk of their slaves, And then the Spanish ship went down, sailed down the coast and then back. And this is where I think Daisy's grandfather was first captured. And he was sold in New Orleans, and the Turner story is that he was sold cheap because he was arrogant and a troublemaker. And I think he may have also been sold cheap because he was sold illegally. These slaves were put in the care of a magistrate, but before they were put in the care of a magistrate, 10 disappeared, and I suspect they were sold illegally. The importance of the Turner story, though, is that he was a troublemaker is important to their narrative and important to their standing. And that is, he then was sold. I think he was carried north by a slave trader, sold to John Golden of Port Royal, Virginia, and he made a lousy slave. He refused to work. And luckily, John Golden was a sporting man, and instead of making him work in the fields, he took him and put him to fighting gamecocks and boxing. Now, boxing was really the underbelly of slavery. How many of you have heard about slave boxing? And it would have been done between plantations. It's very unusual. This is actually, this guy here is Tom Molyneux, who was a slave a couple of generations before Alex's father. And he gained his freedom through boxing and then eventually fought an Englishman called Joe Cribbs. But these boxing matches, as I said, was the underbelly of slavery, in that they were ruthless. They were fed by liquor, and it is also said that there was more won on a boxing match than through horse racing. So it was quite a lucrative business, and anytime money and liquor mix is not always good. Now, I think that John Golden profited from this. All of the Goldens that and I went back several generations, they were yeoman farmers. And suddenly, here is John Golden buying 2,000 acres on the Rappahannock River, prime land where only the most aristocratic plantation owners live. And I think also the other interesting thing I discovered was he was not invited to the aristocratic plantation owners' dinners. They all had guest books, and I was able to, yeah.
What state is this, the Rappahannock? What state?
What state? This is Virginia, Port Royal, Virginia, and this is the Rappahannock. So anyway, I suspect that he didn't only win on Alex's father. He was involved in the cock fights. He was involved in all these boxing matches. I think he bet well and held on to his money and was able to buy this plantation. And this was where he bought this in 1835. Now, Alex's father continued to box until he killed a Jamaican in the ring. And that must have been a terrible fight. He refused to fight anymore. That was it. Nothing Golden could say would change his mind. And I think it also affected Golden as well, because he did something quite unusual. He had been a member of the Liberty Baptist Church, but from the records, he seldom attended. And suddenly, he is leading a group from the Liberty Baptist Church and founding the Bethesda Baptist Church, which is based on the serving of no liquor, selling no alcohol, which says to me that this is a definite change in his life. And he furthermore went on to help build the church. And so I think he also was affected by whatever happened at this boxing match. Now, Alec's father married a Cherokee woman. At least this is what we know from the Turner side of the story. Here, I found her bill of sale. She appears to be a dark Cherokee woman. I suspect that, she was simply called a Negro. But Alec talked about learning Cherokee from her. Daisy always said she was Cherokee through and through. And she was sold to John Golden because this guy, Meeker, was moving to Mississippi. And Rose, the grandmother, had a bad hip and couldn't walk the distance. And because John Golden owned her husband. This is all in these court documents. And so the interesting thing in the Turner story is the thing that they remember is that John Golden carried her home to his plantation in a cart. And this showed how valuable her husband was. And there is, of course, no mention that she had a bad hip. But so you can see two sides of a story, and always the Turner story is maintaining their respect. And that's important to remember, and was important to the Turners. Now, we know where Rose lived on the plantation, because in Golden's will, he talks about skinker pines and a line to a brook just north of Rose's house. Rose became the seamstress of the plantation, and she lived right around in here. She had a little cottage and a garden, and Alec was born there, and up until children are 5 or 6, they intermingled with white children. They were not separated. And he had an attachment or friendship with somebody he called the Little Mrs. Zeffie, who was 3 years older than he was. And indeed, the Goldens had a granddaughter that was called Zeffie that was 3 years older than he. And as he was playing with these children, he noticed that he was dressed differently. He wore a smock, no shoes, and white little boys had on pants and shoes and stockings and long sleeves. And so he asked his mother, why am I dressed differently? Well, she didn't say anything, but she made him a pair of red moccasins with Cherokee designs on the toes. And he loved them, and he was so proud of them, and he strutted around in them. And then he began to notice that any time there was white people around, she would take them off him and put them away. And one time, he was strutting around, and Mistress Golden came down to see about her granddaughter's dress for her birthday. She sees him with these moccasins. She She takes him off his feet and throws him in the fire. At which point he goes berserk. And he bites her, and he scratches her, and he pummels her, and she falls into a swoon and is carried up to the house. But all he remembered was the awful look in his mother's eye. And she was petrified that he was going to be sold off the plantation. And so she just, was dying a million deaths. Well, that did not happen, and she was able to finish Zeffie's dress, and the next day they took it up to the big house. And they went in through this big hall, and the hall, excuse me, was lined with tables of sweetmeats and cookies and all good things. And they go up the enclosed staircase here, on the right here, and she tries on Zeffie's dress, fits perfectly. She calls Alec, he's already coming down the stairs ahead of him, and he is going straight toward a plate of ginger soldier cookies, and is biting off their heads, and knocks them all over the place, and so he's in trouble all over again. And this time, he is punished, and he's punished by the overseer called Pusley. Now, the Turners all called him Pusley. His name was actually Presley, but I rather like Pusley. And so Pusley sets him to carrying water to all the slaves that are working up and down this field. And he does that probably for 3 weeks or so. Then he begins to look after the goats and the cows and the horses, and works in the stable. And then he is put in the milk house. And it is while he's in the milk house that he begins to be taught to read by Zeffie, who brings along her primer and is teaching him how to read, which is totally illegal in Virginia.
Excuse me, how old would you be around that?
Well, I'm not absolutely sure whether I suspect maybe 12, and she was 15, but that's a guess. And Daisy always said that Zeffie encouraged him to escape, that she would help him escape. And the question is, was she an abolitionist? Probably not. It was probably more a rebellion against her grandmother, the generational type. I don't know. This is all speculation. But Daisy always said that Zeffie said if he could get away to Vermont, he would be free. Now, so he's learning to read outside the milk house, and one day Mistress Golden catches them, sends Zeffie to the house, lashes Alec with her whip, and he holds on to the primer and actually bleeds on the primer, but he doesn't let go. And later on, when he escapes from the plantation, he carries his primer throughout the Civil War. That was how important as a symbol it was.
Is this in the 1840s or so?
This is probably now 1852-3.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Alec was born in 1845. His father came to this country in 1830 on the Phoenix. And Alec was, Alec escaped from the plantation in 1862. So from then after beginning to learn how to read, he also was involved in singing on the Rappahannock. Just like we have sugaring in the spring of the year, they had seining where they would catch a pile of fish and salt them down. And it was an important part of food for the plantation, and they would sell some of the extra fish. But at the same time, this kind of work called for singing. And Alec loved and learned all the spirituals and all the work songs on the plantation, and later on taught his children when something would be sung. And Daisy always told me that "Been a Listening All the Night Long" was a song they would sing while singing. And here is just a little example of it.
Been a listening all the day long. Been a listening all the day. Been a listening all the day long to hear some sinner pray. Go read the 3rd of Matthew. Go read the chapter through. That is a guide for Christians that die and go from here. Been a listening all the day long. Been a listening all the day. Been a listening all the day long. For to hear some sinner pray.
Now, this is about 1862, and the Confederates are all camped out on the Golden Plantation. And today you can see in a closet how one of Golden's sons, probably Frank Golden, who at that point was managing the farm, how they had borrowed 2 bed quilts, 2 light counterpanes, father's blanket. And, you know, when I saw this, I thought, my gosh, this was when Alec was there. You know, you just want to peel back and look and hear what the walls can tell you. Anyway, about this time that the Confederates were encamped on the Golden Plantation, across the Rappahannock was the 1st New Jersey Cavalry. And a guy called Ferdinand Dayton came across the river and ran into Alec. And Alec told his children later he didn't know what made him so bold. But he talked with Ferdinand Dayton and arranged that when he waved a white bedsheet, Dayton would come and carry him and whoever was with him across the river to freedom. And this is what happened. And apparently, at first, there were a pile of people going to escape, and then as it turned out, it was only maybe 2 or 3. Now, this guy, Broderick, who was the colonel, overheard Alec and another ex-slave, Humphrey, from the Golden Plantation, talking about an outpost of 8 Confederate soldiers housed at the Thomas Golden Plantation. Thomas was John Golden's son and lived right next door. And there is quite, he planned to take 20 men, 20 volunteers, and go and try and capture this outpost. And there are a number of articles about this raid. And they all mention Humphrey. And if you see, here's Humphrey. He is 26, and Alec is 16. Alec was given, this is Golden later, a document telling all the slaves that he has lost. And Alec was given the value of 1,500, and Humphrey was given the value of 1,200. It was because I think he was 26 that he was seen as the leader and is mentioned in some of the accounts of this raid. Alec is never mentioned, although we hear that there are other ex-slaves helping lead this raid. And indeed, Alec writes about it in his pension application. And then, you know, research is a funny thing, and I had gone down to see this woman in New Jersey whose great-grandfather had been a member of the 1st New Jersey Cavalry, and he had written an account of this raid. And it turns out, then I wrote her, as the book was about to come out, for permission to use stuff she'd given me. And she sent me this article, which was Gilman the Spy. This was about Humphrey. And it talks about Humphrey going back in later life, trying to get his pension, but it tells about him being on the raid. It also talks about how when he came back from fighting along the Shenandoah, that Golden had put out advertisements seeking his arrest and recapture, that he went away to New Jersey. Alec stayed right there, which I always thought was a testament to his spine. So anyway, this raid, they left and crossed the Rappahannock and made their way to the Thomas Golden Plantation. And this is where they went, and they captured an outpost of 8 vedettes. And it was while the soldiers were doing this that Alec snuck away half a mile to where Pusley lived. And he calls to Pusley, he climbs up on a ladder and shoots him. And this is the way he can finally turn his back on slavery. This was the most important scene, touchstone story of his life. And it enables him to turn his back on slavery and get on with his life. And from then on, he returns to the 1st New Jersey Cavalry. He and Humphrey are both given posts. Humphrey with Colonel Wyndham and Alec with Ferdinand Dayton. He fights with him throughout the Shenandoah Valley, then other battles, Brandy Station, and Gettysburg. And then Ferdinand Dayton, who is the assistant surgeon, has an opportunity to go with the 2nd New Jersey Cavalry and become a full surgeon. Alec is to go with him as his orderly. And they are waiting for orders along the, outside Washington. And Alec is given a furlough, and orders come through. And while he is on furlough, Dayton has to go out west. And there he is. When he returns, can you imagine how he must have felt? And I learned about this again through his pension report, where he talks about coming back and then being sent to City Point. And City Point, at that point, it became Grant's headquarters, but at that point, it had 2 hospitals, and I'm sure because he had worked for Dayton, he was sent to one of the hospitals. And he's there for the rest of the war. But when the war ends, Dayton finds him. How? I don't know. but then takes him back to New Jersey, gets him a job in a grocery store, and gets him into night school. So he stays there for 2 years, and then returns to Washington, and through the Freedmen's Bureau, gets a job with A.H. Merrill in his slate quarry in Williamsburg, Maine. Now, do all of you know where Williamsburg, Maine is? It is literally at the end of the earth. You have to go by ship, and you finally get to Bangor, and then you have to go 50 miles by a wagon, and you get there, and you know, you see this landscape, and luckily they arrived in the fall of the year. And Alec quickly became a leader. And this is Alec here. And I was able to, I was sure that was him, but I was able to identify him by his watch fob. While he's there, they go through a winter, and a number of, there are 38 other ex-slaves that go to work in the slate quarry. And a number of them die of pneumonia. They just never felt the cold before. And so in the spring of the year, many of them want to return. And so Merrill sends Alec to take them back to Washington and also to recruit some new workers, which he does. And in doing that, he meets his future wife, Sally Early, who is at that point a little girl of 14. And he falls in love with her. He's 24. And they decide that when he comes back, because he's got to take the men waiting back to Maine, and then Sally is waiting for another group to go to Maine. When he comes back, they will marry. And sure enough, and here's his watch fob, you can see in his wedding suit. Merrill provides him with his wedding suit and Sally with a wedding dress. They marry. This is in 1869, early September. And then they return to Maine. And this is Sally. Unfortunately, she was a lovely woman. I don't have a photograph of her when she was that young. But immediately they have, in the next year, they have twin daughters. And then they have a third daughter. And Sally, at this point, is 17 and is really sick. She has TB, and she's dying. And Merrill gets her to Mass General and to a doctor, helps Alec get a job at the North Station loading freight. And so they move to Boston, and Sally's life is hanging, she's clinging by a thread. And Alec is reading all the newspapers and looking for a permanent position that he can move his family. And he finds in the newspaper an advertisement by Charles White in Grafton, Vermont. And he comes to Grafton, he checks it out, and he likes the people there and thinks that he can make it with his family. On top of that, he is told by the people there what a healthy place Grafton is. And he said that just went right through him, and he knows it's a place for his wife. He is also told that he won't be able to earn enough to put salt in his bread. And he is determined to prove them wrong. So he finds out that most Vermonters have a 3.5-pound axe. He has a 4-pound axe. axe made, and cuts twice as much lumber.
What was it? What is it? What did he have in there?
A 4-pound axe instead of a 3.5-pound axe.
Axe?
He's chopping down trees with a number, and they've asked him to bring, again, several men with him, and he comes up. And his conduit, excuse me, to the town really is the general store. And he helps the general store owner unload wagons, and he's a fine storyteller. He sits around and sings with the men, and they begin to know him as an individual. And he is then, he's unloaded several barrels of flour, and he said he'd like to take 10 pounds home to Sally and the children on the hill. And the storekeeper says, if you can take a barrel of flour, carry a barrel of flour home with you, you can have it. And he says, you're lost, because I'll take it up. And so this is what Daisy...
The woman said, if you can carry a barrel of that flour to Sally and the children on the hill, I'll give it to you. Or Father said you were lost, because I'll take it up when I go. So Father finally got ready and got started. So he put the barrel of flour, and he told me many a time just how to do it. Just right from parallel of his shoulder and started. When he got to the bridge, the first bridge out there, he didn't take it all, but he changed it like that, a little like that, over just a little bit further, because he said he found out he knew he had to make the hill, and the valve would have to lay a certain way then. So he shifted it then, and went on. And my father, glory to his name, Alexander, my father, I'm proud to be your daughter, went on up that road and up that hill and across that long field, because we lived in the shanty, and my father never set that barrel down until he got up in the shanty door. And that must have been at that time 40 men all following him with with little jugs of Jimmy John and hard cider and all. And Mother told many a time how after they all got drunk. After Father set the barrel of cider down, and they all was saluting him and congratulating on him. And my father carried that barrel of flour from Grafton village up on our hilltop for us children to eat, to have bread. Now that's the truth, if I never speak a word again.
She's a good story.
And she's what, 102 or so here? She's about 102 here or something?
Yeah, yeah. And he became known as the strongest man in Grafton, and people really respected him for that. The other thing about Grafton was that the town fathers were all abolitionists, and here suddenly came along an ex-slave, and they wanted to help him. And he was such an incredible character that everybody took to him. And he was, one of the things I didn't tell you was, in Maine, I was able to find the records, the wage-earning records. He was the top wage earner for the 5 years he was there, which is amazing, of all the quarry workers. And he was just a tremendously hard worker. And as they cut the trees, he was able to buy the land cheap. And he came to Vermont in 1873. By 1886, he had enough money to try and build a house, and neighbors all gave a day's work. And he was able to build a house, and his family became part of the farming community when he had He had 8 children, and the 8th was a little boy they called Enough. And he sadly died, and after that they had 5 more girls. But the reason I'm telling you about Enough was when he died, that another friend came and helped him carry the coffin down the hill. Everybody, all the neighbors, got in his corn and really helped. So he had become part of the Grafton farming community. And this became the family homestead. And his daughters, as they grew older, many of them went down to Boston because they could find jobs and husbands. Some of them settled down there, but they would send their children up every summer. So it became a family homestead. And so here are 2 ex-slaves who never probably thought that here they could have a going farmstead and all their family around them. You think how far they came. And their children were integrated into the one-room school. Here is Daisy. And she had probably her most famous touchstone story is the story where the teacher asks her to take a black doll at the end of school. And this is a story about that.
I was a little girl there. I think I was about 8. Every year at the end of school, like June, the end of June around, they had 2 days where all of the fathers and mothers attended the last day of school. And so on this last day of school, it got to be, I guess, about almost the last week, when the teacher, for some unknown reason, decided to put on this dialogue showing all of the different countries and the nationalities and costumes. So the teacher wanted me to take a black doll, Dinah, and to say the poem that they had written for me to say. And I didn't want to do it, but after I went home and told my father the story, he said it was all right for me to take the colored doll that the teacher wanted me to take and say the verse. It was no harm. And he explained who could know or who would realize or decide which house looked the prettiest, painted red or green or blue or whatever the color was, or which tree was the loveliest. And so if I was the little darker skinned girl and took the dark colored doll, I was just as lovely as the other, then what was the difference? And that was the first beginning. It's a strange thing, I've often thought about it, that my mother could pass for white, father was a peculiar color, and the children was mulattoes and different things. But we never had mentioned color of ourselves. We never had thought about it at all. And from the day of this occasion, it was lovely. And every farmer wore his best overalls and clean white shirt, and the ladies all dressed up in their one dress, in black alpaca or dark blues, and their hair fixed and everything. Amy Davis was the first one that come out with her doll, and she was all dressed in white, with blue sash, and little ribbons on her hair, and her doll in white and ribbon. And she held her dolly very lovely in her arms, and said, "My dolly came from sunny France. Her name is Antoinette. She's 2 years old on Christmas Day and a very darling pet." So she went on rambling about her doll and Antoinette. I hope she'll take the prize. So then she went and set Antoinette out front on the seat and went back and twirled her skirts and fixed her hair ribbon, but set behind like a mother. So that's the way they went through that whole performance with these dolls. And finally it got down to me. and I was the last one to go out at the foot of this thing with this black doll. Well, the more I thought of it, if they were going out, I began figuring what a fool I'd been to let my father work me into taking this black doll and saying it was all right and thinking it was all right because he said so. And with the doll at home, my white doll and my white dress and everything, I could have been the best. Instead of that, there I was, the old school dress they all had seen, my hair braided instead of being fluffed and everything, and I was angry. So my voice was high, and I said, you needn't crowd my dolly out, although she's black as night. And if she is at the foot of this show, I think she'll stand as good a chance as the dollies that are white. My daddy says that half the world was nearly dark as night, and it took no harm to take a chance and to stay right in the fight. So stand up, Dolly. So sit up, Dolly, and look straight to the judges at the right. I'll stand right by your side if I do look right. And so I went on saying my piece through. But instead of saying the piece that the teacher had taught me to say, I was saying what I wanted to say on my own. And so I said, the teacher's face, as all can see, is redder than a beet. And Dad has come down from the back and has led her to a seat. And gave me that famous turn look. So I sat down and shut my mouth up tight, just like a book. So I set myself down. But instead of sitting gently, I had half thrown Dinah up against the seat like that and set myself down with the red dress and all. Well, they had applauded like that for all the others, you know, and they'd come, but made quite a time. Well, then nobody said a word for me. They didn't know. But much afterwards I learned that they didn't know what to make of it. They were all amazed at me talking like that. And the teacher giving me something to say like that. A black doll and making me say a thing like that, and they knew that I was mad and all. So they didn't know whether they ought to applaud or whether it was good or bad. But it kind of broke up the thing. But when they got through with it in the end, they gave me the first prize. The judge said it was the best acting, the genuine acting of the whole thing. And I felt it and said it. So they gave me the prize and I won it. It was the $10 gold piece.
Now, Daisy was really quite beautiful, and she never married, but she had a rather tumultuous affair with a white man called Joseph Bonet, who was a real cad. And they were to be married Christmas Day, but her father took ill on the 20th of December. She came up to Vermont. He died the 23rd. She stayed for the funeral. And when she went back, she discovered that he had been with another woman. And so she brought suit for breach of promise. This is a black woman against a white man. Now, a white woman against a white man in 1927 in the Boston courts, I don't think would get anywhere. But Daisy did so. And by God, she won. And she won a $3,750 settlement. And here she is in her hat and saying, I am vindicated. And this was how she was. She stood up any chance she got. So this is quite a woman and a wonderful storyteller, but she also realized that in today's world, her story needed to be written. She realized that everybody was literate and for her story to continue. And so she began to ask me if I would write it. And I couldn't do it then, but I promised her that I would do it. And so finally, after I retired, it took me 10 years. But what I think she gave us was this vibrant family story with a distinctive voice about a critical time in American history. And amazingly enough, that story comes from Grafton, Vermont. Thank you.
When did she die? 'Cause
She
you-
died
Margaret said she was a note in 1984.
83.
83, that she was 100 and usually go see her.
And she died in February 6th, I think it was, 1988.
5 years ago, so 105. Wow.
Well, 104.
104.
When was she born?
Yes.
Are there descendants of her siblings in Grafton
Yes.
still? Or around
Yes. And the interesting thing is that they are mostly great-grandchildren now. You couldn't distinguish them from any other white person. And those that stayed in the Boston area look African-American.
Is that just because they perhaps married African Americans in
That's
Boston?
exactly right. Yeah, I mean, where are you going to find in 1900, there weren't very many African American men around. And so those that stayed in Vermont tended to marry white men.
And my other question is, where exactly in Grafton?
Well, you go down the Townsend Road, maybe a couple of miles south, and you'll see Turner Hill Road. And you go up there, and there's only one building left. But they are going to do some kind of exhibit, and I think they've done some archaeological work to find out where the other buildings were. Yes.
Is the property still owned by the Turners?
What?
Is the property in Grafton still owned by?
No. Actually, it's owned by the Wyndham Foundation, which Daisy always hated. She referred to it as the Wyndham Foundation. And I think the reason she didn't like it was because when the woman died and the Wyndham Foundation was set up, it was a period of change in Grafton, and a lot of new people came in. And while the Turner family was well known in Grafton, and her father greatly respected, there was a different culture once new people came in, and Daisy felt she wasn't respected. Other questions?
Is the family buried in the area?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there are a lot of family
In Grafton?
in Grafton, in the Grafton Cemetery, and also in,
The little one on 35?
I've forgotten the name of the other one.
But on 35?
Oh,
Or towards going towards Chester?
No, going toward,
At the end of the Apple Ground and near Hoganville or on the way to Hoganville? The little cemetery just
yeah.
before where, 121 goes.
Yeah.
Hoganville?
Not
Yes.
that side, yeah.
Yes. Hoganville, that's exactly right. Thank you. Any other? Yes?
So when back on the Rappahannock, there were some pictures of plantation when it was green or blue, and other pictures of plantation when it was like brown. Was that just?
Well, what happened was, you saw the photographs when I first discovered it.
Right, it was falling down.
And it was blue. And then a guy called John Clark bought it. And he painted it sort of mustard yellow and redid it. And he was going to, his vision was to have kind of, I don't know how you express it, but a town, a village of buildings, some kind of clean development. And this was his dream. And when the stock market went way down in 07 or 08, I think
That was the end of his dream.
yeah. And you know, I mean, it's amazing to see the land really almost the way it was. And so I think a lot of people were relieved.
During Reconstruction, did Golding stay on the plantation? Was he forced to sell it off for taxes, or what happened to it after?
He died in 1863,
During the
and
war?
his family lost all of their wealth really was in slaves and land.
Yep.
So when I was looking for the plantation, I found one guy called J. Ashton Golden, who was the great-grandson of John Golden, who lived just literally a stone's throw from the plantation. He didn't know where the plantation was. He knew that at one point his family had been well off, but other than that, he didn't know anything. He sent me to another cousin who filled me in a little bit more and actually sent me to the plantation. But they had lost
It was
all
pretty.
their money.
Yes.
Yes.
When I was a little girl, I lived in Northwest Minster, and there used to be black women that walked from Grafton all the way down to Bellows Falls. And I don't know if she was one of them or not. I think that the Lady Sisters were, that they walked, and you think, well, they didn't have transportation at that time.
That's right. There's a wonderful story of Daisy's father, how he first got his first Morgan horse, and that was in Bellows Falls. And it was a piece of research I never did but should have done to find out there was some kind of accident and a railroad car tipped over and all these Morgan horses got out. And they rounded them all up except for this one that was really troublesome. And they got Alec to come down and he was able to tame it enough and he took it home.
He was always a troublemaker.
Any others? Yes.
I was just wondering about your research. You said it took about 10 years. I mean, you've done an amazing, amazing job. And
Well, I was very slow. I thought it would only take me 3 years. But what I found was it was such a fascinating, amazing story with a different voice. I wanted people to take it seriously. And people will only take things seriously if it's put into a larger cultural, historical, social context. So that was my goal.
And when I first heard about Daisy Turner, it was, you know, people were sort of saying, oh, she just is a storyteller, meaning she makes things up. You know, that was sort of around in the background. So it's really valuable that you were able to prove so many things.
Yeah, I mean, many, you know, I was talking about sort of the signposts, stories that are signposts. And there were enough signposts so that you could do research around it and bring out more material. And then there was the luck, like Gilman the Spy, which was a fascinating insight. Yes, excuse me.
What was it like for you, Jane, to meet Daisy, actually meet Daisy Turner? Really, because she's the historian, you're the researcher, and you put all this together, but what was it like personally for you to actually meet her?
Well, first of all, I was scared. And I couldn't have asked for a worse meeting the day I arrived. She was fighting with somebody, this guy LaBelle, who had a trailer on her property, and he was screaming at her and she was screaming at him, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I better leave. And, but I didn't. And another guy stopped in and he saw that they were screaming at each other and asked, you know, then I asked if I could come back again. And it was, you know, then we fell into the habit of my going every week. And because I was a constant, you know, our your relationship changes as you listen and talk. And I lived far enough away so that when I came down for the whole day. And I would record her for 2 hours. Then I would get her mail. I would do errands. You know, our relationship changed. And then what I had originally written her about was I wanted to do a video for the schools, because here was somebody who had grown up in Vermont, who must have felt all of the racial tensions, and I wanted her to, I didn't know about the doll story at that point, but I wanted, you know, her talking about this so that kids, you know, could know what it was like. So every so often I would say, well, Aunt and she had asked me to call her Aunt Daisy. And I would say, Aunt Daisy, what about this video? Well, I have to ask my lawyers. I have to ask my nephews. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, this is all going to go for naught. And my boss at this point said, you're going down once a week? That's 1 day out of 5. And I said, yes, but this is really important. And luckily, we talked about that just recently. And anyway, she allowed me to do it. So 9 months later, I finally knew her pretty well. And I said, okay, Aunt Daisy, I'm coming with a videographer. Well, I have to ask my lawyers. I have to ask my nephews. I said, yeah, you ask them. And I'm coming on Monday. And so I went from, that was a Thursday, and I went up on Turner Hill to see the shots I wanted. And as I'm going up, there is a guy coming down in a game warden coming down in a Scout. And he asked me what I'm doing, and I explained. And he asked me if I know this man, Arthur, I think his name was. And I said yes. And he was living in Birchdale Camp. And he said, well, he's missing. And if you see him, let me know. I said, fine. And I went up, looked for the shots that I wanted, and went home. That was Thursday. Saturday morning, Daisy called me up. And she says, first thing she says to me, not hello or anything, she says, you are coming Monday, aren't you, with your videographer? And then she says, Arthur's been murdered. And I, you know, so when we got there, she wanted us to go up on Turner Hill. And I said, well, really, we came down to focus on you. And so we go up. And I come back and she said, well, did you go into Birchdale Camp? Did you get the blood stains? I said, no. And anyway, I said, now. And I knew everything was coming down to this. I said, please, will you come out? I think this is really important. And I knew, you know, she probably would say no, but she said, give me 5 minutes. And then she came out. And she told 3 stories like I had never heard her tell them, because she had another, Wes Graff was the videographer, another audience. And she was wonderful. And then I knew it would work. Now, she was 101 then, and we could only shoot in the summertime. because her cabin was too small, and so we didn't finish it till she was 102 or 3. And, anyway, and then there was the problem of whether she'd like it, There'd been another video done of her, which she hated. So, she had a bad spell, and her niece had wanted her to move in with her, but Daisy would have none of it. So they took her to the Springfield convalescent. No, first of all to the hospital, and then to the Springfield convalescent home. And so it was there I had to take the video, and I'm petrified. But she comes in, and pretty soon she's singing along with all the songs, and she's laughing at her jokes, and told me I could show it to her. So, it was over a period of 3-4 years. And once you finish, it doesn't end a relationship.
But what a wonderful experience for you.
Absolutely. And this last photograph is Daisy on her 104th birthday.
Wow, that's wonderful.
And she's standing.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you feel like filling out the survey, or looking at the book, thank you.
For the years I'm 7